Hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's really lovely to be here with you today. I just want to say thank you very much for joining me. I just wanted to give a little activation warning before I start this session. I am talking about the heart of grief today, and grief can be quite a heavy topic. I'm going to try and keep it a little bit lighter for you because it's only very early in the morning here, but there will be mentions of death, mental health issues, and suicide ideation. So I just wanted to give a little activation warning for you that those topics will be covered within this webinar. And I'd just like to point out today as well that today actually is National Suicide Prevention Day. So I think that's really good timing on their behalf, putting me up today. So just if you are struggling, don't do it alone. There's plenty of people out there that can help you. So without further ado, I will find my slides and we'll get started. Here we are, the heart of grief. It was such an honor to write a chapter for this book, for the When Hearts Heal book. Heart healing has completely revolutionized my life and has really been the missing link that I've always been looking for. And grief is a topic that's really very close to my heart. I've lived my entire adult life in grief, and it's not something that we ever get over. It's something we learn to live with. So today I'm going to be talking in a raw, unedited way, sharing my journey, hoping that it will help give you some strength on yours, or give you some tips for the future, or for how to help your friends and family who may be in grief. So I often hear people say things like, I'm not grieving, so I don't need to know about it. I don't need to think about it. Well, you naturally want to hide from grief because it's painful. But hiding away from it doesn't protect you from the effects. The effects in our mind, body, and in our heart. And the effects in our heart are the creation of a wall that we build up around our heart. And by trying to bury our grief and repress it, this allows this wall to grow taller. And unfortunately, grief never leaves us once it arrives. It becomes a part of who we are. And the sooner we embrace this, the sooner we can learn to find the gifts buried within it. I'm really passionate about raising awareness on grief. I feel that it's a topic that we just don't talk about enough. And, it's a topic that is going to touch all of our lives at some point. And actually, I'm really thankful that I had so much experience with grief at such a young age, that it's given me the tools to be able to cope with future losses in my life. I've seen other people who haven't experienced any forms of grief until much later in their life really struggle with it, and I think going through such traumatic grief at a young age, for me, when you're younger, you kind of do have a little bit more of an ability to bounce back. The mind is still growing, and I feel that that's kind of was almost a gift to me in a way. So who am I? Oh no, we'll go. What will we cover today? So we're going to cover who am I, what grief is, a little bit of a background, and that it show you that it just goes far beyond bereavement. We're going to touch a little bit on about how grief affects our mind, heart, body, and soul, because it's a full body, a full psychological, full spiritual journey. And then we're going to look at specifically the heart's power to heal. And I'm going to finish with an exclusive special offer that I've put together for this summit, which goes through a small portion of my unique heal method that I have made from my own personal and professional journey walking with grief. So I really do hope that you enjoy this today, that you get something out of it, if not for yourself, for somebody else, and that it just opens your eyes a little bit more, so you feel less nervous or scared about starting these conversations with people. So who am I? My name is Hannah Darby. I'm an award-winning holistic healer. I won an award for my practice last year for the Women Who Inspire. I have a psychology and criminology degree, amongst many other qualifications. You can see them there. And what do I do? So I help those navigating deep grief and emotional pain heal at the root through a powerful blend of energy healing, therapy, and subconscious reprogramming, so that they can feel whole, worthy, and confident enough to live fully, love deeply, and create the life that they deserve. So my professional journey has been deeply tied to my personal journey, a personal lifelong grief journey, navigating grief, trying to understand it, trying to work out how it's shaped me, how it's shaped my life, and trying to understand why I had so many issues growing up as a teenager, a lot of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and really trying to move through those and understand why I was feeling the way that I was. I've been featured in multiple international and national magazines. You can see them at the bottom there. And I've also co-authored 6 books to date. And the When Hearts Heal book, I've got a copy here. If you haven't actually got a copy of this book, I highly recommend you do so. It's available on Amazon. And even more exciting is I'm actually in the process of writing my own solo book all about grief. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do keep an eye on me, follow me, and I will let you know when that's available. So what is grief? We all experience grief at some point in our lives. Unfortunately, that's inevitable. But grief is what we feel on the inside. Mourning is what we express on the outside. It's the outside expression of grief. So grief is a physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual response that occurs within ourselves when we experience any form of loss, anything that was important to us in our lives. When we lose anything meaningful, it can cause us to grieve. A lot of people assume that you only go through grief when somebody dies. Yes, this is one of the most known forms and most talked about forms of grief. But grief has so many different faces and so many different ways it can enter your life. And the more we can prepare ourselves for these and educate ourselves, the better prepared we'll be for when it turns up. Excuse me. So grief goes far beyond bereavement. A couple of examples are, but not exclusively, losing a loved one, losing parts of yourself through accident, illness, or bullying, loss of your health or relationships, loss of a child, going through adoption, having a miscarriage. Could have been your parents going through a divorce or you going through a divorce yourself. The loss of a safe, happy childhood, loss of stability, losing your home, losing a life that you dreamed of, or losing a pet. And I think that is an especially important one, actually, because a lot of these other forms of grief are not socially recognized. You know, we tend to be more caring and compassionate if somebody has lost a person, but actually that grief can be just as deep and profound when we lose either parts of ourselves or a relationship or a pet. I mean, for me, I have 4 cats and 2 dogs, and they're part of the family, and when I have lost other animals before in the past, that has, that's deeply affected me. So grief has so many different faces that go far beyond death. And do you recognize yourself in any of these losses? It's a deeply personal journey, but one that affects us all the same, but in different ways. And one of the most important things I want you to take away from this is that your grief needs to be witnessed. And that's not just by other people, but by yourself as well. Allow yourself to feel. Because grief needs to be expressed, not repressed, in order for us to move forward. And not all trauma contains grief, but I think all grief can contain trauma to a certain extent, and it can cause traumatic responses within the body. The most common trauma responses are the fight mode, flight, fawn, and freeze. And the one that's most associated with grief is the freeze state, because we just go numb and we freeze and we kind of get stuck in time and we don't want to move forward. But the grief we carry might also not even have been our grief in the first place. There have been studies now that have shown that trauma can reside within our DNA, and that the grief that we carry may come from ancestral or past life wounds. And that's why I've also trained in these advanced heart healing techniques, which I'm very proud to have done. And especially, I think, within our generation, it really wasn't that many generations ago that there was a world war. So there's been, there's an awful lot of grief, inherited grief and trauma that we can carry within ourselves. I know that I felt so much lighter after going through that process myself, from all of the ancestral grief that was carried in my family, by my German grandmother being in a concentration camp. So sometimes if there's a feeling of kind of a heaviness that you feel inside, that might be where it's coming from. And our adult life is deeply affected by our childhood experiences. So when we experience traumatic grief in childhood, it can leave us growing up in this freeze state. And this means that we can't move forward because we're unable to process our grief. And this intense feeling travels into our heart. And that does protect us. It protects us in that moment in time, because it stops us from feeling these raw, heavy feelings that we're just too young at that time to emotionally and psychologically cope with. But as we get older, this sabotages us and stops us moving forward past our grief and leaves us unable to heal. So I want to give you a little bit of my personal background that then led me while sitting here speaking to you today, and then my kind of professional journey with grief. I've done this exercise a few times, and I've got some of my clients to do it too. And I would really recommend that if you can, give yourself the time to do this exercise after this talk, or at a time that is appropriate to you, because it may bring up some uncomfortable memories. So you need to be in a place where you're able to process those. It's called a personal loss history timeline. So what you do is you go through from the beginning of your life right through to the present, and you put the date down, and then you put down your loss. And I think actually you will be surprised at how much grief you've actually been through in your life when you write it down like this, when you write down everything that you've ever lost, whether that be people, relationships, things, or parts of yourself. And whenever I do this with people, they're actually surprised at how much they've been through, or also how close together some of these losses can be. And that in itself causes a lot of problems, because it kind of stacks, and grief sits on top of each other. So every form of grief we go through brings back previous grief that we've been through as well. So here's some of my personal loss timeline. The first experience of grief I ever had was when I was about 5 or 6, and our pet cats died. And I love animals, and they used to curl up with me when I slept. And as I mentioned before, studies have shown that people who experience the death of a pet have feelings of grief just as powerful as that with the death of a human. But I am so glad that my parents were brutally honest with me about death right from the start, because death is a part of life. We cannot live without death. And I advise you to do the same with your children. When our cats got sick, we all went to the vets together, and we were there with them right at the end, holding their paw, stroking them whilst they passed away. And it was an honor to be there in that moment with them. And I know when the time comes for my furry friends, I will be there with them right until the end. Being with them when they passed gave me the chance to say goodbye, and I'm so thankful to my parents for giving me that closure. As I said, the first thing I did when I got my home was I had 2 cats to call my own. I now have 4. They don't replace those cats I had, but they remind me, they allow me to enjoy and remember the happy times that I had with them. Go forward a few years, I lost family members. I lost a grandmother, a family friend, and an auntie. And then go forward into my early teens, and that is when I was 13, my father died. It was a very sudden death. He was only 50, and he was sitting on the sofa. I went in to take him a cup of coffee. He was having a heart attack, and then he was dead. So a study looked at children whose parents had died between the ages of 13 and 21, and found that those children felt that adults didn't understand the longevity of their grief and how it intersected all of their lives. And I would agree with that. I think children understand and are capable of understanding a lot more than adults generally put them through, actually, I'm really pleased that my mum stood up for us, and she allowed us to be there at the death certificate signing, and she allowed us to go to the funeral home to say goodbye. And I know that the officials really were trying to persuade her not to do that, and I'm so pleased that she did. She gave us the chance to say goodbye. That's my mum and my sister, you can see in the picture there, with myself on my wedding day, because every little girl wants her father to walk her down the aisle, and I was very lucky that I had my uncle there to walk me down the aisle. So, but I still wanted him to be there on the day. So that's him. That's where his ashes are scattered there. So I went there so that he could still be a part of the day. And there is my very lovely first dog, Jet, as well, who is no longer with us. And I was there holding his paw right up until the end as well. And going through that grief at that time in my childhood, there was no support, no support through the school or through the doctors. There wasn't any kind of counselling or anything, so we were just left to deal with it on our own. My mum was lost in her own grief. My peers didn't understand it, and so I just buried all those feelings inside, and they started to cause me a lot of problems as I got older. That with anxiety, depression, just a want to kind of numb the feelings inside, or just to feel anything, because I was just, I'd buried everything in a box to try and protect myself. And it has been shown that following a parental death, people can be more likely to suffer from depression. A little bit of depression is a natural response to grief, but it can pull you down into the depths of a clinical depression. There's also, I'm a country person. I live in the countryside, in the Worcestershire countryside. I guess it's where the source comes from. And I have a deep sense of grief for the loss of nature. We are in a climate emergency, and so many people kind of seem to have forgotten that. And when I was younger, there were so many more insects and birds flying around, and the seasons were more defined. The hedgerows were alive, and the older I've got, the less there is out there. And it's like I can almost hear like Mother Nature crying. And I just want to touch on the fact about AI there as well, and the amount of water that AI uses. And I think that's another thing that people have kind of forgotten about. Later on, I lost parts of myself to bullying. I also lost a close friend to suicide. And next week, I'm actually doing my orange button training, so I'm really excited about that. I don't know if you've heard about that scheme, so that I can help others like him who need that support. Later on in life, I had a car accident and I broke my back. And I really was not expecting that kind of injury, and then later illness when I developed ME, to have that same kind of profound grief as I did when I was that little girl. That took me back to feeling like that little 13-year-old girl again who'd lost her dad. And I later found out that when we do go through grief, it's not only the grief of a recent loss that we experience, it also stirs up all that other past grief. And even if we've worked on that before, it can still slap you in the face much harder than you ever anticipated. So I invite you to try this exercise and do it for yourself. I think you'd be surprised at how much you've actually been through, and allow yourself and give yourself some compassion as you do this. And I think it also helps you realize that we are all going through lots of different things at various different points in our lives, and grief, like many things, is invisible, you know, so we never know if that person is carrying or holding grief, which is why we should always try and be as kind, caring and compassionate as we possibly can be, because you know, you never know what somebody's holding underneath the surface. So how does grief affect you? So we naturally want to hide from it, but we need to be able to move through it. Grief has many different stages. I think there's no timeline to grief, but grief itself does have a timeline. Quite often we have like an anticipatory grief. If there's somebody's going through an illness and we know they're going to die, or somebody's older, then you've got acute grief, which is when the grief has just happened. And that is the really raw, messy, painful part. And is in that part, all you can really do is sit in the boat and hold on, try and ride the waves. Then we've got early grief, which is within the first 2 years of grief. And this is kind of, then after 2 years, that grief, we then say it becomes mature grief. And actually, most people don't get any help with their grief until they're in year 5, which is a long time to go through that on your own. I mean, there's multiple models of grief, and I don't have time to discuss them all with you today. One of the most kind of, I suppose, known about that you might have heard about is Elizabeth Kolber-Ross's stages of grief. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because I feel that a lot of people kind of get hung up on this and they think, oh, I should be in this stage, I should be in this stage. But you go through these stages at some point in your grief journey. You might not necessarily do them in that order, but they're guaranteed to come around at some point in your experience. I was actually very lucky to train with David Kessler on his Grief Educator program. And grief is a mind, body, heart, and soul lifelong journey. When it enters our life, it never leaves us. It's about learning to live with it and not fight against it. And also remember that the feelings that we're feeling they're just feelings. And feelings are neither good nor bad. And we should just allow ourselves to acknowledge these feelings, listen to them, lean into them, and then let them go. You know, some of the feelings that people may not be expecting to feel with grief is like numb. Numb is actually a feeling. It's just the absence of feeling much. There's feeling stuck, which is obviously the opposite to the acceptance stage. Feeling anger. You know, anger is a natural part of the grief cycle. And I think a lot of the time we are taught that anger is a really negative emotion. But as I said, you know, feelings are neither positive nor negative. They're just feelings. And anger, we need to allow ourselves to express that anger and to feel that anger and let it move through us. Otherwise, you know, that can quickly build up the wall around your heart. There's also relief. It's a feeling that is valid within grief, especially if there's been a lot of suffering before the event. And jealousy is a natural feeling within grief as well. You know, I think you can kind of be jealous of, say, like those that are still left behind, or why were they taken and not somebody else? You know, that can be a completely natural feeling as well. So how does grief affect our mind? It can leave us feeling socially isolated, pull away from others. We struggle to accept our new reality. It can leave us feeling lost and confused, feeling like we've got kind of this inner turmoil going on, or like you're trying to go through life in a fog. Grief affects our body. It leaves us feeling weak and exhausted. We struggle with sleep. And then when we do sleep, it can cause vivid nightmares. It can leave us feeling anxious and panicky. It can cause excessive sweating, clammy hands, body shakes, panic attacks. It can leave a tightness in your throat or a dry mouth, making it hard for us to talk. It can leave a hollow feeling in the pit of your stomach, or making you feel like you've got butterflies in a way, making you feel nauseous. It can affect your appetite. It can stop you eating healthily. We tend to not look after ourselves so well when we're going through grief. And obviously then by not eating properly and by not sleeping properly, these exacerbate other symptoms. It can cause headaches, muscle aches, joint pain. And some people may cry uncontrollably. Other people may not cry at all. And just because you don't cry doesn't mean it hasn't affected you more or less than somebody else who does cry. I think that's a really important point to just touch on there. I think that we kind of have this stereotypical view of what grief should look like in our heads, and that's just not true, you know. And joy and grief can coexist at the same time. You can be grieving and you can be happy, you know. It's not a singular thing, and it's not something that, you know, we feel like there's that kind of like classic in grief figure that you've got from the movies, but that's just not true. Grief can affect our ability to move, can cause addictions as well. There was a fantastic talk about addictions earlier on in the training. If you haven't had the chance to listen to that one, give that one a listen. You know, because we're trying to numb those feelings and numb the pain and try to escape from the pain because we don't want to feel it. That could be perhaps to many different things, like alcohol, work, drugs, doom scrolling, binge watching, exercise. These addictions just cause another problem. You know, once they don't help you heal, and once the effects of your chosen vice have worn off, then you're just going to end up feeling lower than you did before. And there's no point in trying to just numb and hide from the pain. We have to, unfortunately, allow ourselves to feel that pain, to move through it. And it's not nice, it's not pleasant, but it does change, and it does get easier as time goes by. And how does it affect our heart? So I've already mentioned we build that wall around our heart. And we build that wall, and that affects how we feel our emotions. It can leave us feeling hollow-hearted. But when we put up that wall around our heart, it not only stops us from things from going in, but it also stops things from going out. So it stops our ability to receive as well. We unfortunately have to accept that we've changed. The world has changed. And it's hard to accept that we can never go back to the way that life was before. We can't return to the old you, the old me, the old way of thinking, the old way of feeling. We have to learn to accept the new us, learn to love the new you, learn to feel worthy as the new you, feel enough as the new you, and learn to trust the new you. Lessons in grief. So grief has made me who I am today, and for that I'm thankful. Without it, I wouldn't be sat here talking to all you lovely people on this Wednesday morning. And, you know, life is all about duality. We cannot have the light without the dark. We can't have pain without pleasure. We can't have life without death. And grief is a natural part of the circle of life. In Western cultures, we tend to suppress our emotions. We're taught to have a stiff upper lip, you know, and to never speak ill of the dead. But I think this kind of exacerbates these feelings and grief, and can leave us stuck in that freeze state, stuck within the grief. You know, I much prefer to take a approach more like in Mexico on Dia de los Muertos, on Day of the Dead, where they celebrate the lives of those who are lost rather than mourning their death. I know when I'm gone, I would prefer my loved ones to celebrate my life rather than mourn my death. How do you feel about that? So grief has shown me the depth of my courage, resilience, compassion, and it can show you too if you allow yourself to feel it. Grief led me on a lifelong educational healing path. It's why I studied psychology at university in an attempt to understand all the depression and anxiety and the way I was feeling on the inside. This helped me to understand why I was feeling that way, so I knew exactly where those feelings had come from and what to call them and why I was experiencing them. But it didn't help me move past those feelings. I was still stuck there. I was still stuck in that fog. I was still stuck in the depression. It wasn't until later on in my life when I found the spiritual healing powers of Reiki, which allowed me to actually drop into my body and really allow myself to feel where these feelings were coming from. And that did allow me to energetically start to move some of these feelings around. But I still felt like there was something missing. Emotions of grief are intense, and a lot of people, I've seen it mentioned before, and I really like this analogy, that grief is like the ocean, and the crashes, and sometimes the waves are crashing around and it's really heavy and chaotic, and you've got all of these feelings bombarding you at the same time, and other times it's really still, and there's just maybe the odd little tiny wave, the odd little tiny bump. And experiencing these feelings is not linear either. There's no lines in the waves. They kind of like come and go in a more, they're going to come and go backwards, but you don't know what order they're going to come in. We can't put a timeline on grief on how we're supposed to feel. And if we try to put a timeline on ourselves and our grief, then we're never going to heal. But working in the heart and bringing in the heart, the heart is free from time. And working in the heart free from time, we're able to allow our mind to catch up with our new reality and create a safe space for grieving and healing to occur. And that is why I then went on to study heart healing, because it really allowed that little tiny me to say those things that I needed to say and get them out of my heart, a way to safely communicate those. And then what I do is I bring in all of my kind of learnings from my own personal grief journey, and then also from my professional knowledge and professional grief journey, to really feel that like the mind, the heart and the body all need to be worked on as one. If we just focus on one, we're not going to move forward. And that's what kind of led me to create Heal, which is my unique method I use within all of my programs, which really does help focus on all of those areas and kind of sees this as a whole. We are whole interconnected beings. We can't just work on the mind and expect everything to be fine, because the heart has been shown to actually have neurons of its own, that the heart actually has its own brain. And we need to kind of bring in the heart and the body and the mind to be able to go through a complete kind of healing journey. I'm just going to grab a bit of water. So what is Heal? So I combined my lived and my professional experience into a proven method for grief integration. That's my cat there. So I help people, I build their hearts and their souls back together with gold, just like in the Japanese method of kintsugi. And I love this analogy because it's not about fixing what's broken. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. But you do feel like your whole life is shattered into pieces. But it's about learning to accept the differences in your life and accept those that life isn't going to look the same again, but that's okay. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. And we repair that. I like to say we repair that with gold, because it's about finding the wisdom in the wounds, as Natasha says. And the principles following the heal approach are simple. So we've got hate, which is healing the relational wounds of the heart, because grief is a relational game. It's we grieve because we loved, and we loved something we had a relationship with. E is express pain and anger. As I said, those feelings need to be expressed, not held on to. And allowing ourselves to express that pain and anger in a safe, formatted, constructive way is so important. And as I said before, anger is not always necessarily a bad emotion. We've got A, acceptance of our new reality. And that is one of the kind of the biggest hurdles to come across within grief, and it's accepting that life is always going to look different from now on. It's neither good nor bad, better or worse. It's just different, and it's about learning to kind of then L is learning to live and love again, because I know that when I'm gone, I want people to be able to still live and love fully and deeply, and I don't want them to be stuck in the past, mourning my past. Yes, I want them to celebrate my life and remember me, but I want them to do that with a smile. And I want them to do that without it bringing back all this pain and hurt. And I want them to be able to kind of enjoy that memory of me rather than get stuck in the pain of the loss itself. And that is now something I'm able to do with all of those that I've lost before. And there was a point where I never thought I'd be able to think about those people, especially like my father, and be able to remember the happy times. But now I can, and yes, there is still times where you do feel a bit low, but you don't get stuck in that low point. That's what I'm trying to get across, is that you allow yourself to move through it. I know that these emotions will come back again. There will be points where you feel lower than the days where you feel lower than other days, but it's just allowing yourself to be in that space, but to move through that space and not get stuck there again. Because grief, it never leaves us. I quite often hear people say, well, I'm not grieving now. Well, I'm always grieving. Yes, there are times where it's stronger than others, but I live my life in grief. Is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. It just is a thing. It just is my life. It becomes a part of who we are, and a part that we shouldn't hide, a part that we should celebrate and that we should talk about more often. So when we learn to kind of accept those differences in our new reality, we can discover the gifts hidden beneath it. As I said before, after all, we cannot have life without death, and that grief is a natural part of the circle of life. And I'm happy to be a part of this circle. So my program allows people to move from pain to purpose, to find a new love for life. And when you can incorporate heal into your life, you can free yourself from the effects of grief. So people have done this who report sleeping better, looking after themselves better, being able to move forward with their life with confidence and clarity. And it's about learning to notice the signs of grief within ourselves, give us care and compassion when these feelings come up, and give it grace rather than ignore it. And then when we start to do that, we can move forward confidently again. People come to me as they feel like their hearts have been blocked and they can't see why. And more often than not, it's because they say they're not grieving at that time, but they are. There's grief hidden in their past that they still haven't been able to process. And by allowing them to bring that grief to the surface and to process that grief, they're then able to move forward with their lives. And grief kind of can attach itself to old wounds. And when we look back at these old wounds, we're not trying to reopen them, but we're trying to heal them. And it is quite hard sometimes to see which grief this grief is coming from, if you've experienced a lot of grief or if it's an old wound. But we can kind of project those old wounds of our past onto our present, and those wounds then become kind of part of the story of our grief. And it's really important to kind of notice in yourself the facts versus the story, because we always our mind likes to create stories. It likes to fill in the gaps, and kind of go off on its own tangent. And I think that can lead us with a lot of pain and a lot of heartache, especially when we're talking about grief. So it's really important to strip your grief right back to the facts. And once you do that, you'll realize actually that you are able to shift a lot of the guilt and shame and what ifs about it, because they're all part of the story. They're not part of the facts. So this is my offer that I'm bringing to you today, is my one of my entry-level offers, which is called Embrace Your Enoughness. And I chose this one because, as I said, grief brings up old wounds. And the wound of not feeling enough or feeling too much is a really core wound that we all go through at some point in our lives and can be deeply tied to our grief journey. So for many years, I carried the weight of not feeling good enough. Through the bullying, through the grief, through the trauma, through the illness, they all reinforced this feeling and that whisper inside my head that you're not good enough, like you need to be more. And maybe you felt that too. But this is what I've learned. They're stories. They're not the truth. You strip that back and you realize that these are stories that your brain is put around it. They're not the facts of the situation. And this is why I created this program, Embrace Your Enoughness. So this is a gentle yet powerful 3-session journey where we go deep to uncover and heal the hidden wound in your heart of not feeling enough. And I do this through one powerful heart healing session paired with a coaching and energy work session. So will guide you through to release your old never not enough story that's been holding you back, allow you to anchor into self-trust, worth, and acceptance. And remember the powerful truth that you are already whole exactly as you are. Clients tell me that this work has changed the way they see themselves forever. They leave lighter, more confident, and finally able to put themselves first without guilt or shame. And guilt is a massive part of grief, and being able to let go of that guilt is really, really powerful. And it's a massive gift for me to be able to give you. So if your heart is whispering that you need this right now, I'd love to support you. The link is up here on the screen. You take a screenshot of that. There's a special offer on there for you, saving you over £100 with a bonus Reiki energy healing session, and also if you haven't already got one, but if you do, this one will be different. I'm also going to give you a signed copy of the When Hearts Heal book as part of this package as well. So if you're ready to feel safe in your own skin, to finally embrace your enoughness, then I would love to hear from you. So how can you get in touch with me? I've put together this slide for you. Take a screenshot of this. These are all of the places you can find me and hunt me down. I really enjoy having conversations about I do. I enjoy having conversations about grief. And if you have got any questions about anything that's come up for you today, you want any more guidance, or you just want your grief to be witnessed, then please do send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. There's a link there where you can book a no obligation connection call with me. So just put the kettle on, make a cup of tea, and come and have a chat. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my YouTube channel there. I do put live trainings up on my YouTube, as well as information about all of my other books as well. And there's also my website. And I do run my very own grief community on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Thriving After Grief. And why do I call it that? Because I want you to thrive. I want you to feel that you can still move out from surviving and actually thrive after grief has entered your life. If you'd love, I'd love to have you join my community. Scan the QR code there on the screen, and that will take you straight to the group. And I also do deliver kind of weekly, bi-weekly trainings in that group where I discuss in slightly more detail different parts of the grief journey, including tips and tricks of how to help you move forward with your grief, and lots of other kind of grief-related trainings. And it's just a safe space I've created to allow people to have their grief witnessed. And so do take a screenshot of that. I'd love to hear from you. Then finally, just to bring this to a close, I just want you to remember that grief has to be expressed, not repressed, in order to heal. And you need to let it flow. That's why I chose that picture there, because, so I've used that analogy before, grief needs to flow like water, and like water is ever changing. It's never the same, and it can look very different from one day to the next. I want you to remember there's no timeline in grief. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and it's okay to ask for help. So thank you very much for joining me today. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who's here listening, who's joined me live. Thank you so much for your support whilst I've been doing this live. Thank you to everybody who's watching this on the replay. As I said, if you've got any questions and you are watching this on replay, do pop them under the video and I will be checking back and get back to you. And I hope to hear from some of you in the future.